In 1998, a treatment was being written for a screenplay for a film based on Interplay and Black Isle Studios' seminal title, Fallout, a post-nuclear role-playing game. The treatment outlines a film that would follow a main character whose identity is never really specified, leading a team of Vault Dwellers from Vault 13 searching for a new water purification chip. A story that anyone who has played Fallout 1 is familiar with. And it being a group of Vault Dwellers is kind of an interesting adaptation and translation of the way that Fallout 1 allows the player to choose from a few different pre-made characters for their journey. So instead of just picking one of them, why not just throw them all together? You know, it could make for an interesting inroad for some character dynamics that didn't quite exist in the game, and that would be interesting for a movie. Think something like The Goonies, but with more violence and weird, zany, morbid shit. You know, like Fallout. And instead of a pirate's treasure, it's a little chip. And instead of being reunited with their families and learning a valuable lesson about friendship and the indomitable human spirit, our main characters are changed forever and exiled from their comfortable home because they've been corrupted by the ugliness of the outside world. But there were also some more interesting changes. The vaults are kind of just described as being more straightforward bomb shelters that are all identical and are all basically just underground, scaled down versions of major cities, with Vault 13 being Los Angeles. Ghouls don't seem to exist, neither does the Boneyard. The hub kind of exists, but only in name. We also get a definitive answer to who started the Great War, or as the treatment calls it, World War III. The movie wanted to definitively establish that it was Vault-Tec, as the head of Vault-Tec was the one who launched the first bomb. The forced evolutionary virus is not like this remnant of unchecked capitalism and progress corrupting the sciences like it is in the games. It's somehow an invention of the super mutant master, who apparently is also not the flesh computer homunculus thing, as he's somehow present for the final battle at the end at Vault 13. A final battle where it's revealed that Vault 13 had plenty of backup water chips. The Overseer just kind of wanted to root out some dissidents in the vault. Also, we learn from the Overseer recognizing him that the Master is Vault-Tec. Like, he started the Great War, he's the one, he's the big bad. And the whole thing ends with Vault 13 kind of just being wrecked in the battle, and the Vault Dwellers take the rest of the survivors and go to establish the village of Arroyo. So, you know, kind of the same basic ending as Fallout 1, but just kind of less interesting. Now, the question is, would this Fallout movie have been a good movie? A good adaptation? Well, considering that it was being written by the man who brought us such amazing moments as this.
Mother, you're alive. Too bad you will die.
I don't think so. And you know, there are a lot of problems with this treatment as it is. It's the classic thing where a screenwriter is tasked with adapting a story with very clearly defined beats to hit from the source material, but it's set in a world that they haven't quite taken the time to understand yet. Much in the same way that the Tomb Raider and Resident Evil movies went on to just kind of ape the conventions of contemporary action movies of the time with the wire work and the slow-mo and the leather, etc. This Fallout movie would have just been a shallow facsimile of, like, the Road Warrior. Fallout's Wasteland is so unique, and this movie would have forsaken that to just try and imitate something that's been done already because it's successful. A big part of the Wasteland's identity is the Weird West nature of it, and a big part of why the Wasteland has that feel is the culture of pre-war America in Fallout. With this being a treatment, I don't know if there was room for those kinds of details in it, but it really does feel like that whole aspect of Fallout's identity was just going to be completely missing in the final product, in favor of just turning Fallout's unique setting into a generic post-apocalypse that I'm sure some genius thought would be more suitable for a general audience or something. No personality, no substance, no politics, which is a shame because Fallout's politics are such an integral part of the brand. These really poignant cultural critiques, and without a creative team that can capture that, it just becomes this bland product of whatever time it was produced in. But hey, let's forget about all that for now. and bring things up to present. And think back to when you first heard that Amazon was producing a Fallout TV show. Now, speaking for myself, when I first heard that Fallout was being turned into a television series, it would be safe to say that I was a little trepidatious. My thought was, with something like The Last of Us, it is a much easier endeavor to shape that world, that narrative, and those characters to fit a TV show. While it is true that you do get that subtle psychology of the intermingling of gameplay and the story that helps the player just kind of get more invested in what's going on, the player's actions during that gameplay don't actually impact the narrative in any meaningful way. To put it another way, you could take the game verbatim and turn it into a show, and it would work. It would kind of be bare bones and hollow. It would be kind of a hack job, but it would work. But something like Fallout, an RPG with a reactive world and characters, factions, and everything, that stuff is tricky to adapt into a passive medium, since any individual player can have a completely different experience from someone else. Then you get into conversations about canon and true endings, and it gets really, really messy. But then I watched the first season of the show, and it actually manages to avoid that trap, and it does it by doing what any of the games would do, and that's its own thing. It doesn't try to adapt any pre-existing narrative from any given piece of source material. It just tells its own story with its own ideas and its own identity and characters in the canon of Fallout. It doesn't try to reinvent anything. It just does its best to slot right in next to everything else, as opposed to kind of just singling out one thing and trying to kind of overwrite it, which in a way is the objective of a lot of adaptations. Just like Paramount's Halo, probably the most egregious example I can think of, taking place in a different canon, completely overwriting the events of the canon of the books and games, trying to fit the square peg of the pre-existing lore and characters and events into the round hole that is the lowest common denominator Game of Thrones wannabe fantasy series. Fallout instead creates its own place in the big jigsaw puzzle that is the Fallout franchise, or whatever metaphor strikes your fancy. In order to do this, in order to tell its own Fallout story and to do its own thing, it must have an understanding of Fallout's identity, something that the 1998 treatment severely lacked. The people behind that treatment thought that adapting the basic skeleton of the plot of the first game was enough for it to call itself Fallout. When in reality, just like any other franchise, be it Halo or Star Wars or Warhammer or whatever, there's more to it than just showing the audience a Spartan and calling it Halo, or shoving a Space Marine in our face and saying it's Warhammer. Think about the ideas that you associate with these brands, these intellectual properties. Think about how the best Halo stories are always about marrying the epicness of a space opera with these ancient alien motifs to tell very human stories about perseverance. Or how some of the best Warhammer stories, where the grim darkness of the far future where there is only war, is used as a backdrop to tell these stories of people who are just trying to carve out a life and an existence for themselves and their kin in this almost comically oppressive environment. So then, think about Fallout. What is it about? What does every Fallout thing have in common?
What the fuck have you got against us, bitch?
Let's help each other out. Let's do a little investigating together. Let's start from the beginning. The first thing that you see whenever you boot up the very first Fallout game. Possibly one of the best introductions to any game ever made, in my opinion. It sets the tone for the rest of the franchise in such a concise and just visually and stylistically interesting way. The first thing we see is an old television playing some kind of advertisement for the Underground Vault program. Very old school Americana 1950s, 1940s American cartoon stylings. This advertisement is then interrupted by a news broadcast about the ongoing annexation of Canada by the US. Two American soldiers stand tall in suits of power armor and execute an unarmed man who is presumably a POW or maybe even just a Canadian citizen, and they share a laugh about it. The camera keeps craning out to reveal the dilapidated home in which this TV sits, and a desolate, bombed-out cityscape. There's no diegetic sound whatsoever. It's all set to the Ink Spots' Maybe. And you know, on its own, that song is just a charming little ballad about wondering if you're ever thought about whenever you're not around. But paired with the bleak visuals and the utter absurdity of what's being presented, and the aforementioned lack of any real soundscape apart from the song itself, it creates this eerie sort of voyeuristic sense that we're getting a glimpse of a world that was already broken. With the old TV, the 1950s cartoon aesthetic of the Vault-Tec ad, and the Vault Boy mascot, the presentation of the news broadcast on the TV, and the big, bulbous, rounded-edge power armor we see the soldiers wearing, we get a sense of the culture of this world that existed. A culture that seems like it was consumed by consumerism and unchecked capital interests, giving way to horrible imperialist atrocities like we saw on the TV. The America that would be okay with their soldiers in a militarily occupied area on national television executing a captured unarmed man and laughing about it, and then giving a nice little wave to the camera, telling us to go buy war bonds between broadcasting live war crimes and a commercial for a new car that costs $200,000. I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, we're looking at just textbook late-stage capitalism. At a point where capital has most certainly consolidated all of its power behind the state, working hand in hand to exert as much control over the population as they can while giving them as little breadcrumbs as they can, and while milking them for all that they can. And of course, naturally, trying to expand their reach, to expand their empire for the most people to exploit. And if you think that that's me just inserting my own politics into it, we're gonna get into the lore, okay? This was intentional. From the very beginning, that is what Fallout has always been about. Fallout is about the sociological and cultural impact of unchecked capitalism, focusing on telling stories about the many, many, many different ways that individuals can interact with these systems of power and either try to build something new and good out of their circumstances under these systems, or just, you know, give in to the corruptive nature of these systems of beliefs or economics or what have you. Or, you know, you could just be a twisted freaking psychopath and just kill everyone. The setting of Fallout's Wasteland is just the perfect playground to explore these ideas of anti-capitalism and anti-war messaging with this interesting little black comedic twist with a little bit of spice. That's why Fallout's Wasteland is often referred to as a post-apocalypse. The Big Reset already happened, and a new frontier and socio-political landscape has taken shape from the remnants of this insane world that came before it. You might not have noticed it, but your brain did. And there are the smallest inklings of that in the treatment of the unmade Fallout movie, but like, where's Gizmo and the hub and that dark mirror of real-world class exploitation? Where is the Americana and the Western motifs? Where are all of these things that make it such a rich setting with more to say than just, this sure is a lot like Mad Max, huh? And moving on to Fallout 2, which leans even more into that idea of this new frontier, dealing more with things like in-group and out-group dynamics and tribalism. Fallout 2 sees the player as the Chosen One, descendant of the Vault Dweller from the first game, embarking on a journey across the burgeoning New California to find a Garden of Eden creation kit, a Vault-Tec made piece of pre-war technology which is basically a starter kit for resettling the land after some kind of cataclysmic event. Their village of Arroyo is dying of famine and disease, and their only real hope is to find one of these kits. Along the way, the player will become embroiled in the ongoing political strife in the region. And what I think is great about this is Fallout 2 takes full advantage of its setting to break down these situations and conversations, and it goes hand in hand with another important element of Fallout, and I think that that goes hand in hand with another important element of Fallout as a brand that really came into its own in the second game, and that is the pulp of it all. Fallout 2 is so crass and juvenile, but in a way that's more satirical than, like, high school edgelord cringe. And what is it satirizing, I hear you ask? Pop culture, American culture, class conflict, tribalism, racism, imperialism. Like, if only there was one word, like if there was a catch-all term that we could use for these things, like one word that we can use for the sociological and economic factors that inform the decisions that we make every day.
Women are physically and intellectually inferior to men. Their role is to bear children and ensure the survival of our species.
Fallout 2 is when the series just goes full tilt into critique of how political systems can be ridiculously flawed and complex. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Vault City before moving on from Fallout 2. To put it plainly and bluntly, Vault City is meant to be a very scathing and honestly kind of prescient statement on the trajectory of American liberalism and the myth of American meritocracy, which we'll come back to. And of course, you know, the franchise has a history of dealing with the idea of slavery, as it is a pretty ubiquitous concept in post-apocalyptic or post-post-apocalyptic fiction, since, you know, it's a really easy way of showing how humans really, really love to regress back to that kind of selfish might makes right mentality whenever there's any sort of social collapse. There's plenty that the franchise has to say about the institution of slavery. But Vault City is supposed to be what a perfect civil society is. It's the new Eden. Vault 8 was supposed to be full of leaders who, when they emerged, would use the Gek to create a new cradle of society. Good old-fashioned American values. But almost 2 centuries later, they've become this walled-off insular community with this facade of a well-meaning functional democracy where everyone can have their needs met and flourish and have a say in how things are run. But in reality, they're just a shitty little liberal pseudo-oligarchy where only the privileged few have actual rights and comfort, and the rest are put to work and, you know, given empty promises and lies of self-determination. All while the aforementioned oligarchs, who you'll quickly realize after talking to them could not work a day in their life, get to kick their feet up, and the liberal upper middle class right below them get a little triggered if you ever rightfully compare the lower caste's conditions to that of your run-of-the-mill wasteland slave. How dare you call it slavery, you slimy leftist. You can look at their material conditions all you want, but I have paperwork right here that clearly states that this is not slavery, this is the prison industrial complex. That right there, I think, is what Fallout is best at. Showing how easy it is to fall into just perpetuating the same old shit that got the world to where it is now. Whether it be the bureaucratic sanitizing of class violence in Vault City, or the breakdown of social safety for the sake of profit and capital in the Hub, straight up class exploitation in Junktown, and, you know, bold-faced slavery in the Den. You know, there's many other examples that you can find in the first 2 games of bigotry and reactionary behavior, the upholding of predatory power structures, or any other sociological phenomenon that perpetrates the ugliness in humanity that led to the Great War in the first place. Because, after all, war never changes. Whether it's class warfare or racial warfare, cultural, humanity has within itself the seeds of its own destruction, and that's what Fallout is about. You know, that's not even getting into anything related to the Enclave, the jingoistic conservative government that sits on its ivory tower making empty promises of returning to the good old days that really never existed in the first place. Fallout is just so deeply political, and Fallout 2 helped cement that, is what I'm getting at. And it brought with it something that has kind of just carried forward into the modern games that really makes the franchise unique, that being the post-apocalyptic setting. Part of what makes Fallout unique is the idea that this clean slate wasn't much of a clean slate at all. A lot of the satire and black comedy that I've been gabbing about stems from this perceived frustration with factions like Vault Cities Council or the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, Mr. House, Caesar's Legion, a frustration with how things never really change. In a way, it provides an opportunity to look at these philosophies and these ideologies very candidly. And, you know, whenever you look at them that closely and that intimately, you see parts of them that you just can't help but chuckle at sometimes. Especially at this little fucking guy. This guy who thinks that because he's just a little bit more educated than most people that he can start a petty dictatorship where him and his army take whatever they want. All because he had to come to grips with his own mortality and, you know, it made him realize just how small his existence is in the grand scheme of it all. And he felt the need to make up for that perceived shortcoming by literally being almost as bad as Hitler.
Until now, every tribe I've conquered has been so backwards and stunted. Enslavement has been a gift bestowed upon them. I'd seen what had become of the NCR's attempts to emulate the culture of pre-war America. The infighting, the corruption. Rome was a highly militarized autocracy that effectively integrated the foreign cultures it conquered. It dedicated its citizens to something higher than themselves, to the idea of Rome itself. It means a nationalist, imperialist, totalitarian, homogenous culture that obliterates the identity of every group it conquers. Long-term stability at all cost. The individual has no value beyond his utility to the state, whether as an instrument of war or production. No, I'll destroy it because it's inevitable that it be destroyed. It's Hegelian dialectics, not personal animosity.
Talking to Caesar makes me feel like the guy on the bus reading Mein Kampf and shaking his head every couple seconds. Like, forgive me if this sounds a little, like, layman of me, like if there are any philosophy majors in the chat, but, like, the whole thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing, you know, it's a perfectly valid dialectical process in a vacuum, right? But the problem is, we're dealing with just ideas here, and we're not leaving room for actual material analysis, which gives room for people like Caesar to say, hey, democracy isn't as efficient as it could be in this instance and has room for improvement, and then jump to, according to my calculations, we need to build the Fourth Reich right now. Like, I think we're missing a couple of steps here.
If you want to get elected, you have to respect their traditions and tolerate them and not call them serfies. It's awful.
Politics, the macabre, pulp, and comedy have always been core components of Fallout from the beginning. Anyone who tries to tell you that Bethesda and the TV series took a self-serious Fallout and made it silly and woke because they're hacks, and that politics were injected into Fallout because of woke or whatever, ignore them because they're wrong, and they're probably a very sad person who doesn't like being challenged by art and are so fragile that they will crumble at the sight of anyone different from them or has anything critical to say about their beliefs. The show just stays true to what came before. Also, notice that I've mainly been talking about examples from the first two games and New Vegas. Many would have you believe that anything Bethesda touches, since they've acquired the IP from Interplay, is in some way an aberration. Blasphemy, because that's when they injected all the politics and the silliness. And if Bethesda is in any way involved in this show, anything that it presents is not what the original creators at Black Isle intended or wanted for their precious baby. Well, as we move into talking about the show, I want you to keep in mind all of the examples that I've brought up from the original creators, the ideas that they had and the concepts that they played with, because I think that we'll find that Amazon's Fallout is, in every conceivable way, a masterfully constructed and executed piece of Fallout media. It's kind of unprecedented. Like, forgive me if that sounds a bit hyperbolic, but I genuinely cannot believe that this show exists. Every single scene is bursting at the seams with something that is just so Fallout. Be that something pulpy and weird, something absurd, and yes, even something political. It's no coincidence that I spent so much time talking about Vault City. Trust me. Everything in this show having to do with Vault-Tec and the vaults themselves is such a perfect blend of darkly funny, satirical, and sinister. In other words, it's exactly what it needs to be. The mystery of Vault 31 and the cultish, pulpy sci-fi insanity of Vault 4 are classic Fallout Vault storytelling adapted to something like a Westworld or Lost-esque TV mystery, and it's a pretty engaging mystery for fans of the games who already have an idea of what kind of experiments and designs the vaults can have, and also for newcomers who have no clue what kind of company Vault-Tec was and what exactly the vaults are. And the show giving us these pieces of what happened to the New California Republic and what led up to the destruction of Shady Sands, it's all used as a vehicle for adapting and reinforcing so many of the ideas that are at the core of the franchise.
What happened?
It's the same thing that always happens. Everyone wants to save the world, they disagree on how.
Hank McLean has got to be one of the best additions to the canon of Fallout antagonists. For one, he's not explicitly evil, he's just a guy who wants what he wants, and what he wants isn't anything too crazy. He just wants to live a comfortable life with his family. Now, the path he took to try and achieve this goal is another thing entirely. In the latter half of Season 1, we learned that his life with Lucy and Norm in Vault 33 is built on a very shaky foundation. Vault 33 and the adjacent connected vaults were meant to preserve a certain group or class of people. A class of people who were deemed worthy by the standards of the time to be future leaders. People who climbed the corporate ladder, who really knew how to get stuff done. In other words, people who either knew how to take advantage of a broken and flawed system to elevate themselves at the expense of others, or sycophants who just happened to be around the right people at the right time to basically fail upwards into a position of power without any actual merit or work. The world that deemed Hank and those others as worthy leaders to be preserved in Vault 33 was a world that was sold a lie of meritocracy. Much like the world we live in today, a lot of people who are at the top of the heap really don't have any practical reason for being there. In a lot of cases, they really just lucked out. And anytime that they try to actually demonstrate their merit and why they should be there, they betray the fact that they just couldn't do anything right. If push comes to shove, these people will crumble. And that's exactly what happens to Hank. When Lucy's mom, who left the vault and had ties to the NCR, wanted to take Lucy away from him, he crumbled and just nuked Shady Sands out of pure divorced dad spite. Still, we see those same cycles of violence take hold in this new world, time and time again, and for it all to have been born of one man's selfishness and short-sightedness, that's what it's all about. One guy who apparently had such a good head on his shoulders, or at least was led to believe that because of the lies of the faulty corporate meritocracy that he existed under. It's just a great little piece of recursive storytelling that is not only just good TV, it serves as a reminder of one of the core ideas at the heart of Fallout. And this leads into something that makes the show very special in the canon of Fallout stories. That being how it offers an actual substantial look at something that the games have only really hinted towards and given brief glimpses of, what the world was like before the Great War. We get extended sequences and almost entire episodes set before the bombs fell, and it still amazes me just how right it feels and how the plot in the past has this dialogue with the concurrent narrative in the present. And that just comes down to how the show is paced and written, which I think is pretty damn good. These writers really do demonstrate how well they understand the philosophy and politics of Fallout. Cooper Howard is the perfect point of view character for these pre-war sequences. His position in society as a veteran of the resource wars and a Hollywood star lets him interact with so many characters that represent the ideas and forces at play that make the world of Fallout what it is. And we really finally get a sense of how the world before the war shaped the politics of the wasteland.
I'm all about scale. And most people think scale means increasing global market share. That's thinking in 3 dimensions, and I'm talking about 4. Because what is the ultimate weapon to destroy your competition? It's not outselling them. It's not outsmarting them. It's time.
The show finally highlights something that is very interesting to me, and it's always sort of been a background thing since the beginning, which is this McCarthyite Red Scare culture that apparently was very prevalent before the Great War.
Communists detected on American soil. Lethal force engaged.
Cooper's journey navigating this pre-war landscape shows just how unfettered greed, paranoia, arrogance, and straight up just mid-wit ignorance got this late-stage capitalist hellscape to such a fever pitch.
Pinko.
Yeah, he still took my money.
Now, Cooper fought in the Resource Wars, and for anyone who doesn't know, the Resource Wars were a series of conflicts between the world's superpowers, mainly the US and China. And as the name implies, the war was being fought over resources like oil and uranium, two things that the people in the pre-war world relied on for power production, but also two things that the global economy was almost entirely reliant on. Remember when I said that we were gonna get into the lore? This is the lore. This is all from the Fallout Bible, don't you forget it. So when demand outpaced supply, people got scared. With America being the center of global capital, all of those capital interests consolidated their power behind the government and the military-industrial complex. Next thing you know, America invades Mexico and annexes Canada to siphon resources out of their neighbors. China sees the writing on the wall and, gets involved in a number of conflicts in the Middle East, all before orchestrating a little incursion into Alaska because they want that oil too. And bada bing, there you go, the Sino-American War. A war being fought for capital, and a war that the powers that be are trying very desperately to manufacture consent for. A new Red Scare takes off. Nationalist and protectionist ideas become really commonplace. Tensions keep rising, and the capital class also sees the writing on the wall, so then you got media capture, and then you got Hollywood producing anti-communist propaganda and blacklisting people who have any sort of sympathies toward any sort of socialist or communist ideas. But Fallout's not political, though. Fallout's not political, the same way that Metal Gear isn't political, But despite the media capture and despite the consent manufacturing, there are still plenty of people who just aren't having it.
We watch people die together up north fighting against all that horse shit.
Yeah, and for what? Voltec's the fucking devil, man. Do you know what fiduciary responsibility means?
Fiduciary responsibility? No. I have no fucking idea. I play a cowboy for a living.
So the U.S. government has outsourced the survival of the human race to Voltec. And Voltec is a private corporation that has the fiduciary responsibility to make money for its investors. And how does it make money? By selling volts.
That's called capitalism, Charlie.
But they can't sell volts if these peace negotiations go through. So Voltec has the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that it don't work out.
Come on, man, you sound like you're in a cult.
You're sitting here defending a system that's ready to set the world on fire, Cooper. Maybe you're the one in a cult.
No.
We actually finally get to see how public sentiment about the Resource Wars and the American anti-communist jingoism wasn't really the unifying force that, say, the Enclave would have you believe. Before the bombs even dropped, this world was already, much like our own, well on its way to being, or already is, a dystopian, late-stage capitalist oligarch hellscape where political power is more the domain of venture capitalists and defense contractors and brands.
It's fucking awful.
I thought the studio owned that character.
They did, and then Robco bought the studio.
The show is just really well written, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Listen to me. Hollywood is the past. Forget Hollywood. The future, my friend, is products. You're a product, I'm a product. The end of the world is a product.
Yeah.
And for those of us who can successfully embrace that, I'd say the future is golden. To the future.
To the future.
But let's address the capitalist elephant in the room. Taking that small kernel of Vault-Tec in the beginning being conceived as this, parody of profit-driven defense contractors, and using that dual narrative structure of the television show of pre-war and present to let that blossom into this amazing realization of how, when left unchecked, capitalism becomes this sort of cultural sociopathy, where people become so motivated by power and profit and making that line go up that even something as insane as welcoming the end of the world by way of nuclear war is a viable business strategy as long as that line keeps going up. And if the competition can't be bought out, then, we can at least outlast them through the end of the world. Not to mention, we also have a neat way of also selling our product at the same time. Exponential growth through the end of the world. I wonder who this Marx guy is. It's crazy that he saw all of this coming. Maybe we should listen to him a little more. We can leave the racism out of it, though. We can cherry pick. Cooper's wife, Barb, is such an interesting character, having to grapple with what she knows about Vault-Tec and their intentions, while also trying her best to make sure that Cooper and their daughter have the best future that they can have. It's such a compelling mirror of how sometimes we have to be forced to participate in these systems that we live under, even if it's a system that inherently is immoral and corrupt. And it's all the more of a gut punch to see that corruption take hold of an individual, because at the end of it, that's the goal of the powers that be.
I'm not a communist, Mr. Howard. That's just a dirty word they use to describe people who aren't insane.
And that's an aspect of this world that a passive form of media like television can afford us. Framing these things in a way that is more deeply personal to our characters. The personal is something that the Fallout games have tried to tackle with like Fallout 3 and 4, and depending on who you ask, they either did okay or it's the worst thing ever. We get such an amazingly realized and bitingly personal look at how this political and economic landscape that, again, is scarily not too dissimilar from the one that we currently live under, takes so much from people. And that's honestly something I just didn't expect from a Fallout TV show. And on the note of characters, I suppose we should talk about who is ostensibly the main character. Lucy McLean is an S-tier character. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, okay? I love her, you should love her, and if you don't, you're not human the same way that I am. I love how unapologetically forthcoming she is all the time. It's so endearing, and it really makes her feel like she is sort of a stand-in for a player character in a Fallout game. It's so fun. And with her sort of being that stand-in for a player character in one of the games, we get a more direct characterization and representation of something like the journey of the original Vault Dweller from Vault 13. It's something that the games have tried to sort of focus on, and given the nature of the games and the types of games that they are, that aspect is probably ignored by a lot of players. And that is how the wasteland can change someone. A big running thing in the show is the question of whether or not, by the end of her journey, Lucy will still want that comfort, that complacency that living in the seemingly safe Vault 33 brings, especially after learning what she learns about her father. It's a very cool parallel to the story of the original Vault Dweller from the first game without being a one-to-one sort of imitation or retelling of that story. Again, show doing its own thing, and the discussion around it being framed as if it's an adaptation, I do really think does the show a disservice. Yes, it's still that idea of our Vault Dweller leaving the safety of the vault, venturing out into the wasteland with a mission, and being changed by their experience in the outside world. But instead of being turned away by their home vault because of their being changed, it's the character choosing for themselves to leave that comfort behind in pursuit of something more real. And the way that the concurrent narratives of Lucy's journey, again, there's a lot of threads that weave in and out of each other and interact with each other and have dialogue with each other. You can tell that Jonathan Nolan had a hand in this show. The concurrent narratives of Lucy's journey and Norm's unraveling of the mystery of Vault 31 is interesting, as we also see how someone can still be in the midst of that complacency and safer environment, but still find it in themselves to identify the problem and do something about it. Norm and Chet's relationship in particular speaks volumes on how easy it is to fall into that complacency and how fast things change or go downhill once the mask of the powers that be starts to slip.
You're a coward. You know that shit?
And speaking of masks slipping, the Brotherhood of Steel in this show. This show leans really hard into the techno-fetishist aspect of the Brotherhood of Steel. You can't get more cut and dry about this than with the season's MacGuffin being the key to cold fusion, like unlimited energy, and the Brotherhood simply wanting it because it's neat. Not to help the people, but just because it's cool, it's neat to have. We can put it up on the shelf next to my Gundam. Or more accurately, so that they can use it to assert their military dominance, since really, unless it's technology that can be used to dominate, it's mostly just locked away in a safe somewhere or put on a shelf next to a Gundam. And through Maximus, we get a really good look at how this mentality behind like collecting and hoarding technology, favoring tools of war, fosters this very harsh, strange and stratified culture where the little guys vie for attention, the middlemen enforce their place in the hierarchy mostly with violence and cruelty, and the old farts on the top are all just trying to get one over on each other so that they can be the big dog. Everything from instilling in those at the bottom of the ladder that from the beginning their best path forward is to just trample over each other to get ahead, to the culture of subservience, to just the wanton slaughter of innocent wastelanders because they dared to ask to be left alone. But no, they stood in the way of conquest and this petty little wannabe empire that the Brotherhood is trying to be. And knowing that the Brotherhood kind of spawned from the remnants of the US military makes a lot of sense whenever you think about how what they're doing now is echoing a lot of the actions taken by the US government and the military-industrial complex during the resource wars. It just cements them and their politics as an indictment of the military-industrial complex, taken to its logical, albeit extreme, endpoint of total moral degradation in the name of hegemonic power that only serves the interests of the few on the top. As the Brotherhood has evolved, they've moved from being less in the business of actually preventing mankind from abusing technology in an effort to avoid another catastrophe, more into abusing that technology and power themselves for fear and warmongering, because what better way to keep the people in check and subservient to the powers that be than to cultivate a certain perception of some other that is threatening their values and their way of life. How very old world America of them. It kind of serves to recontextualize the rivalry between the Brotherhood and the Enclave in Fallout 2 and 3 as less of an ideological or moral clash, but really it's just two corrupt organizations fighting for power over the less fortunate. Both are trying to cling on to some kind of semblance of order and culture from before the war. It's just that one of them was way better at masking their corruption for a while until that started to slip as well, as we see in Fallout 4. Part of the reason that I wanted to bring up some of those examples from the first two games and New Vegas in the beginning of this video is to illustrate that I can go on and on about this show the very same way that I can about the games. How well this show performs in concert with the rest of the canon of the franchise and forwards the overall narrative of the world of Fallout is just a testament to its quality. I mean, it really is just as simple as that. Like what I just went into with the Brotherhood of Steel actually getting back to being something of a formidable force in the Wasteland, no doubt after whatever the canon version of events in Fallout 4 is, leaving the Brotherhood relatively unopposed in the Commonwealth, probably, playing a role in the destruction of the Institute and allowing them to not only integrate some of the Institute's technology into their repertoire, but also to just rebuild military strength and bolster other chapters across the country. Or whatever this downfall of the NCR was in the wake of whatever canon events happened in New Vegas, most likely ending with the Legion being pushed back and New Vegas staying more of a sovereign city-state under Mr. House, which the trailers for Season 2 do kind of confirmed that because we see that his Securitrons have been upgraded to the Mark II OS with the Platinum chip and all that nonsense. Shady Sands appeared to be prosperous and safe, and that they finally achieved that functional civil society, but we do see how quickly things seem to have fallen apart after the destruction of their capital city. It's to the point where the NCR has virtually no presence in the region, in California. And since we don't hear anything about what's going on in the hub or the Boneyard, something tells me that the NCR was slacking in its duties as a governing body and not properly allocating resources to its territories. Maybe even being a little selective about what projects they undertake and who they wanted to take care of. I'm sure that after losing out on their bid for New Vegas, they probably dialed back and neglected a lot of the populations in their territories, like putting all their eggs into one basket and then that basket gets a nuclear warhead dropped on it by a divorced dad. All of this to say that with season 2 around the corner, I am so excited to see where the overall narrative of the West Coast of Fallout goes. I'm excited to see some of the players from New Vegas show up, and I'm very excited to see that Cooper and Lucy and Maximus and all these characters that we've grown to like over the course of the first season are going to become actual major players in that socio-political push and pull that has always been at the heart of the narrative of Fallout. Listen to me ramble. Like, when was the last time that a franchise made the jump from one medium to another and stuck the landing like this? Think about Paramount's Halo. As hard as it is to imagine, there are people out there who know and enjoy Halo from the show. Imagine that person who is a fan of Halo, but only knows the show, trying to connect with another fan of Halo who is just a fan of the games and books. Those two people might as well be talking to each other about wildly different things. Like talking about like Bluey and Daredevil and acting as if they're talking about the same thing. They both have wildly different perceptions of who the Master Chief is, who Dr. Halsey is, or Captain Keyes, why he's an important figure, how the Covenant operates, what the Halo rings even are. But my mother and my aunt, who have never played a Fallout game, watched the show, enjoyed it, and were actually able to talk to me, have actual conversations. They're actually able to talk to me about like the Brotherhood of Steel and how like their mandate and code seems noble on the surface, but they actually kind of do more harm than good to the wasteland at large because of the culture that they cultivate. They're asking me questions about who Mr. House was, and we talked about Robco and Westtech and how evil Vault-Tec is. Hypothetically, if that original Fallout movie treatment that was written in 1998 was turned into a screenplay today, produced and released in place of the show, I just couldn't have conversations like I've had with people who only know Fallout through that movie. That's because the movie that would have come from that treatment probably would have had more in common with the Paramount Halo show and its relationship to the larger Halo franchise. Halo was ultimately canceled in large part due to its insistence on overwriting and trying to reinvent the wheel of the Halo mythos, instead of taking what makes Halo unique and using that as fuel for the fire to cook something that celebrates the franchise. And meanwhile, Fallout is getting award nominations, and it's getting another season that a lot of people are looking forward to. Bringing in a new audience, bringing back old fans, giving them something to connect over. Not acting as this divisive thing where fans of the games and fans of the show are alienated from each other. And there's something really special about that. Special.